Right, we're good. Okay. For those of you who know me, you'll probably know that I'm the kind of person that loves talking to people. I love meeting new people. I love making friends and acquaintances. And a lot of that is due to my extroverted nature. Shout out to all the extroverted people in the room. Love it, love it. So that means that I tend to get re-energized and refreshed after spending time with people. Most of the time, and obviously the right kind of people, but still, that is me. You know, my younger sister, she always used to make fun of me because of how many social plans I would make in a day. I'd have it all planned out in my calendar because I like to be able to make the most of my day and hang out with as many people as I can. And of course, it all revolves around eating food. But, you know, since the pandemic and starting work, I'm probably a little bit less sociable, but given the opportunity, I'm still that person that will meet one person for brunch and then somebody else in the afternoon for like coffee and cake and then somebody else for dinner in the evening. And all the more introverted people in the room are like, you're crazy, could not think of a worse kind of day. Some people nodding their heads, including my husband Sam, who is very introverted. You know, when I come home from a day of socializing, spending my whole day with people, I want to tell Sam all about it. I'm not done talking. I will give him all of the details, all the conversations I had. If he's had a similar day where he spent the day around people, he wants to come home and hide under a rock. So yeah, we are quite different. You know, we've recently returned from holiday and we spent a month in Southeast Asia. We were in Phuket and in Bali and it was beautiful. And it was just the two of us. And I remember when we were planning the holiday, we decided we'd make some intentional steps towards switching off, that we would come off social media for the holiday, practice more silence and solitude, and basically we told all our friends that we wouldn't contact them. That's why, Phil, okay? You're still our friend, it's okay. Right, so I was really ecstatic about this holiday, you know, going away, being on a beach, eating lots of good food, being in the sun, being able to read and relax. But honestly, I was a bit worried about how long I would last with not talking to any of my friends back home. So, of course, I decided whilst on holiday that I'd eventually have to make a friend along this holiday. And for the first few weeks, I was fine. I enjoyed being disconnected. I would chat to like the friendly staff at the hotels we stayed at, and every now and again, but mostly I either spent time with Sam or by myself, and it was actually very relaxing to my surprise. But by the third or fourth week, I was a bit bored of that, to be honest. Obviously not bored of Sam, you know, we're married, it's all good. But, you know, bored of the times where I would just like be by myself. So yeah, I just wanted to meet a random person and get to know them and have some great conversations. And ideally someone that could speak English, because I only know a few words in Indonesian, so that's not really a great conversation starter. And maybe someone similar to me, perhaps one of the like 5 other black people I saw whilst we were in Bali, or just someone easy to talk to, someone with the things in common with me, right? So one day we went to this beautiful beach called Padang Padang, and I've got a photo of it that I took. Yeah, it looks good, doesn't it? It's not the most amazing photo because I took it, but still, it's pretty, right? This beach was also featured in Eat, Pray, Love, that movie, if anyone's watched that. I know, it's cool. Anyway, you can take that down, thank you. So Sam went out surfing and I stayed on the beach to read, which was sort of our usual thing. And it was quite hot and humid, obviously, as it was every day, so I decided to go out into the sea and have a little swim, not really swim, but just kind of like bob around in the water and float. And whilst I was there, I saw this girl who seemed to be there alone, also in the water, floating around like me. And she just had this like look of peace and contentment on her face, and I really just admired it. And eventually we just struck up a conversation, and we hit it off straight away. And it was about actually 5-10 minutes into the conversation before we realized that we hadn't even introduced our names to each other. We were just chatting away, and she wasn't the kind of person I was thinking of when I said I wanted to make a friend, because she was really different to me. She's really different to me, but we got on really well. So she's German, she's a dancer, she loves zodiac signs, she's a vegan, and she had recently moved to Bali from Germany. And she's perhaps someone that I wouldn't have actually crossed paths with here back home, but we had great conversations about our shared love for Bali, and then we had really deep and meaningful discussions about racial inequality and poverty and socioeconomic issues and spirituality, all whilst we were bobbing around in the sea. We appreciated the beauty of the island we were on, the beach that we were on at that time, the weather, and that led us to this conversation about God. And despite not believing in God, she said, a beautiful God must have created this beautiful world we live in. And her opinion was that if there is a God, then they must be a black woman, because who else could have created such a beautiful world? I won't go too much into that. But this whole conversation was really unexpected. She was just so unlike anyone I imagined I would talk to for hours. And we're completely different people, but there was something about her that made our conversation flow. You know, I felt quite refreshed after this chat. I was inspired by her brave heart and intrigued by her views on God. You know, I'm sure I'm not the only one that tends to sort of navigate towards people that are similar to us when it comes to our friendships, whether that be due to their age or their job or their ethnicity, or whether they are married or single, or if they have kids. We just tend to feel more comfortable surrounding ourselves with people that are like us. And if we're honest with ourselves, sometimes people's differences actually scare us. You know, why bother getting to know someone that you'll just potentially clash with over politics or social justice issues or religion? I want you guys to just consider your friends for a moment. Are they a similar age to you? Are they the same ethnicity as you? Are they married? Are they single? Are they Christian? Do they have the same political views as you? I wonder how many of us would actually realize that we spend most of our time with people that are really similar to us, that our social media pages are full of the same thoughts and the same viewpoints, that we spend most of our social time with people that agree with what we believe in. Now, I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with having friends that you have things in common with. I have lots of things in common with my closest friends, and I love that. What I want us to consider is whether we only surround ourselves with people that are similar to us, and if so, are we missing out? So perhaps those of us here that are Christian feel that we should spend our time mainly with other Christians, people that can encourage us in our faith, people that can challenge us and offer godly wisdom and advice, people that can inspire us through Scripture and their journey as a Christian. Sometimes we fear being close to people who don't believe in Jesus because we worry that they might draw us away from our faith or from church. And these can be genuine concerns in certain circumstances, don't get me wrong. But it can also lead us to being closed off from the world around us. I mean, how can we actually share our faith if we only spend time with the people that have the same faith as us, right? I think sometimes we get too comfortable, or maybe it's too fearful, of the challenge of being friends of people that are different to us. And I wonder how easy it is for us to close ourselves off from potential friendships because of our preconceived ideas about a person. I mean, how often do you avoid talking to certain people because they're a different race to you? How many times have you written someone off because they don't believe in the same thing as you? You know, these are challenging thoughts and questions, right? Questions that might actually make us feel a little bit uncomfortable. But I believe for us to grow as people, whether you believe in God or not, it's good to occasionally get uncomfortable. It's good for us to consider the answers to the questions that I've mentioned, and I believe for us the best place to look is at the Word of God. So tonight we're going to look at an unexpected friendship to help us explore common grace. So common grace is the undeserved favor or blessings that we receive from God, the goodness of God that can be seen in every person, regardless of whether they believe in God or not. It's the goodness of God that can be seen in anyone and in the world around us. And we're going to look at the book of Ruth tonight and the story of Ruth and Naomi, which is just an incredible example of how good can come out of the most unexpected friendships. So I want us to read from chapter 1 and verses 1 to 8. So in the days when the judges ruled, there was a famine in the land. So a man from Bethlehem in Judah, together with his wife and 2 sons, went to live for a while in the country of Moab. This man's name was Elimelech, and his wife's name was Naomi. And the names of his 2 sons were Mahlon and Chilion. They're Ephrathites from Bethlehem, Judah, and they went to Moab and lived there. Now Elimelech, Naomi's husband, died, and she was left with her 2 sons. They married Moabite women, one named Orpah and the other Ruth. And after they'd lived there for about 10 years, both Mahlon and Chilion also died. And Naomi was left with her 2 sons and her husband. When Naomi heard in Moab that the Lord had left without her 2 sons and her husband. When Naomi heard in Moab that the Lord had come to the aid of his people by providing food for them, she and her daughters-in-law prepared to return home from there. With her 2 daughters-in-law, she left the place where she'd been living and set out on the road that would take them back to the land of Judah. And then she said to her 2 daughter-in-laws, "Go back, each of you, to your mother's home. May the Lord show you kindness as you've shown kindness to your dead husbands and to me." So just a bit of context before we read on a little bit more. So Naomi and her family were a Jewish family who moved to Moab during this time of famine in their homeland. And as a Jewish family, it was a bit of a strange move for them to make, as Moab was not a Jewish land. Okay? It was a land where people believed in gods and they worshipped idols. But they went there in the hope to escape the famine. And Naomi's name means amiable or pleasant one, and the names of her sons, Mahlon and Chilion, means sickness and consumption. So it was likely that when they were born poorly or unwell, and so it was thought that they wouldn't live long, which we can see because they only lived for about 10 years following being married, which isn't a very long time in that day and age. So as her husband was dead and her only sons had died as well, she wouldn't be able to provide for these 2 girls, her 2 daughter-in-laws. And as she said to them, they'd be better going back to their homes and remarrying and having children. She didn't have anything to offer them at that point in time, and she had little hope for her own future. But they were kind enough to accompany her back. And then we continue to read on in verse 11. But Naomi said, "Return home, my daughters. Why would you come with me? Am I going to have any more sons? Who could become your husbands? Return home, my daughters. I am too old to have another husband. And even if I thought there was still hope for me, even if I had a husband tonight and gave birth to sons, would you wait until they grew up? Would you remain unmarried for them? No, my daughters, it is more bitter for me than for you, because the Lord's hand has turned against me." So Naomi here is painting a very sad picture of what life with her would be like. If the girls were to go with her, they'd be leaving behind their hometown to live in a foreign land. They'd be leaving behind a better opportunity, as she was trying to describe, to get married again and to have children. And maybe you're thinking, that's really not a big deal, Esther. People move cities and countries all the time, and people are single and lead happy and healthy lives, and that's absolutely true. But in the culture and time that they were in, Ruth and Orpah were living in, this was a massive deal. Giving up the prospect to have another husband and children would be a huge sacrifice for them. And in addition, they'd be leaving behind their own families. Both girls still had their own mothers living in Moab, so it would just make more sense for them to return home. Naomi, she didn't know what she was going back to. Yes, she was going home, but what would her life look like? She hadn't been there for a long time. How would she be able to provide for them? So choosing to follow her would be the risky choice to make. And because of that, she wouldn't have expected them to follow her. And when you read on in the next verse, you see that Orpah, one of the girls, although very emotional about leaving Naomi, she makes the choice to head back home to her people and to her gods. Ruth, on the other hand, responds to Naomi with one of the strongest declarations of friendships ever. "Look," said Naomi, "your sister-in-law is going back to her people and her gods. Go back with her." But Ruth replied, "Don't urge me to leave you or turn back from you. Where you go, I will go, and where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May the Lord deal with me, be it ever so severely, if even death separates you and me." And when Naomi realized that Ruth was determined to go with her, she stopped urging her. Powerful words, right? And this declaration was unexpected. It sort of seemed to come out of nowhere. I mean, Ruth didn't really owe Naomi anything. Yes, she was her daughter-in-law, but for only about 10 years. And as I said, that wasn't a very long time in that day and age. And when we have a closer look at each of those promises that Ruth makes, it makes us see how different these 2 women were, despite having that family connection. So she says, "Where you go, I will go, and where you stay, I will stay." So Naomi, as we know, was from Bethlehem. And although it had been a while since she'd been back and she didn't know how things were going to be for her, she was still going home. She was going back to her homeland. Whereas Ruth was promising to leave the only home she knew, the place where her family was, to follow her. She was sacrificing the likely security and stability that she'd find in Moab to follow Naomi into a potentially lonely and uncertain situation. Your people will be my people, and your God, my God. Naomi believed in the God of Israel, and so did her people, whereas Ruth believed in the gods of Moab. She promises to join Naomi's religion, to believe in the one true God and forsake the gods of Moab that she grew up with. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. Despite all of their differences, despite all the valid reasons for Ruth to return to her homeland, she promises to stick with her until she dies. She makes a commitment to never abandon her, even in death. Such powerful statements. And these weren't just words. She meant them with every fiber of her being, and she was willing to follow through on her words. You know, we don't have much information about their relationship in that time before they left, but she clearly loved her. You know, we see the goodness of God reflected in the sacrificial love that Ruth displays for Naomi. Despite the tragedy that Naomi had faced in losing her family, her husband and her sons, and in Ruth losing her husband, we see the grace of God in action, uniting these two women, and we see this beautiful, unexpected friendship blossom. And when you go on to read the rest of Ruth, you see that things turn out very well for her. She ends up marrying this kind man named Boaz, who took care of her and Naomi. And Naomi was also blessed by their relationship. She takes care of Naomi, she helps her get married as well, and she loved her, and Ruth loved her indeed. And then later on, Ruth and Boaz, they have a child named Obed, who in the future has a son called Jesse, who in the future has a son called David, also known as King David. So this unexpected friendship and allegiance that's forged out of love and sacrifice leads to this woman, Ruth, a Gentile woman from Moab, being part of the lineage of Jesus. It's incredible. One of only 5 women to be named in the genealogy of Jesus. So what can we learn from this? How can we apply this to our lives? My first point for you guys tonight is to understand that God created us different on purpose. Different on purpose. As we've discussed, Ruth and Naomi were different. They followed different religions, they had different backgrounds, yet they developed this friendship that demonstrated the goodness of God. Despite the differences humans have, we have all, every single one of us, been created in the image of God. Not to live our lives alone, but to be in community with each other. You know, if God only wanted us to be in relationships with people the same as us, I think he would have created us all to be the same, which he didn't. So, not only did God create us in his image, but he also created us to be in relationship with him. And that is possible because Jesus died and was resurrected for us. God loved every single one of us so much that he sacrificed his only son, Jesus, for our sins so that we could live our best lives in relationship with him. And there might be some people here this evening that need to start with acknowledging that truth, need to start by acknowledging who God is and what he has done for you, and that he loves you. And I'd love to give you that opportunity in a little bit to connect with Jesus. For those of us here that are Christians, maybe it starts with a reminder of what we are actually called to do. Matthew 28, verse 19. Therefore go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey everything I commanded you. And surely I'm with you always to the very end of the age. All nations. God created us different on purpose, and he's called us to go out and to reach people of all nations, meaning people that are like us and people that are not like us. So before I asked you to consider your friendships, consider the people that are closest to you at the moment, and think about how different they are to you. Now we've seen how God can work through these unexpected friendships. I want you to think again about the people that surround you. Maybe take some time this week to go through your social media. You might realize that your feed is full of the same ideas and thoughts, and you're actually part of an echo chamber. Do you have people in your life that challenge you, that help you see things in a different perspective? For some of you, that answer might be no. And maybe you're still a bit anxious about being influenced by the wrong people. And that brings me to my second point. Stand firm in your faith. So in all this time that Naomi spent in Moab, amongst people that did not believe in God, she still had faith in the God of Israel, and she believed that God would come to her aid. And in all that time that Ruth was with Naomi, she still believed in the gods of Moab. And it wasn't until she made that decision to follow Naomi that she decided to change her religion. These women had some form of relationship for about 10 years where they believed different things. And I don't know how close they were, as I said, but they definitely loved each other, and Ruth must have loved her to give everything up for her. But what I love is that Naomi stood firm in her faith. And as a result, Ruth saw something in her that made her want to stick with her and follow her. You know, I love it when Pastor Tom talks about going into temples or places associated with different religions, places that some Christians might be afraid of going into because of fear of spiritual attack. You know, he's able to go into these places without fear because he knows what he believes in. He knows the God he believes in, the God that created him, the God that died for him. He knows that Jesus Christ defeated sin and death. And that same power that raised Jesus from the dead lives in him. He stands firm in his faith. If we're going to be open to seeing the goodness of God in all people, then we need to also learn to stand firm in our faith. And practically speaking, we can do this by growing our faith where we are planted, as in church, and being an active part of church and what we are building here, and ensuring, as Pastor Tom always reminds us, that we don't check our brains out when we walk through those doors. But we also need to take the time when we're not at church to ensure that we're still learning and growing in our faith. We can't just be Sunday Christians. So what are you doing throughout the week to grow your faith? You know, there's a wealth of resources out there. Books, podcasts, Christian TV channels, Bible devotional plans to help us, equip us in our faith. So I want to encourage you this week to find one thing, one new thing. Maybe it's a devotional on faith. Maybe it's a new podcast series. Or maybe you want to pick a book of the Bible and read a verse every day. Whatever you choose to do, do something that will help you grow, and as a result, be more open to seeing the grace of God in all the different people around you. And my third point is to step out of your comfort zone and embrace the unexpected. So now we've understood that we are different on purpose, that we don't need to fear our differences. If we stand firm in our faith, the next step is to get a little bit uncomfortable. We need to step out of our comfort zones and embrace the unexpected. I had this beautiful opportunity to meet someone completely different to me, and she helped me see the world in a way that I will always cherish. And that happened because I stepped out of my comfort zone. You know, I might have missed out on that experience if I didn't engage with her in that conversation, if I closed myself off because she didn't look like someone that I would normally be friends with. I was open with her about what I believed, and she was open with me about what she believed. And although they were different beliefs, we both went away from that conversation with a sense of joy and peace, appreciating the beauty in the world that we see around us. So I want to encourage you guys to see the goodness of God in all parts of your life, in all people, regardless of what they believe. If God can talk through a sunset or a movie set, he can talk through the most unlikely person that you might encounter. Be open to seeing the goodness of God in people that you wouldn't normally associate with. So this week, start a conversation with someone different. Perhaps you want to start tonight by talking to someone in the atrium after church that you've never spoken to before. Maybe at work or at school or at university this week, you want to talk to that person that you might have written off in the past. Everyone deserves a conversation. Embrace the unexpected relationships and choose to see the goodness of God that's reflected in all people. We've been created different on purpose, to live in a world full of different cultures and beliefs, and we're called to reach that world. And I believe that if we're more open to embracing differences, to stepping out of our comfort zones, that we'd see more of the goodness of God reflected in our world, that we would see the grace of God available to all people, no matter what they believe in or where they are from. As a result of that, we see more people come to know the beautiful God that created this world and them, the magnificent God that died for them, the loving God that cares for them. Let us choose to be comfortable with getting a bit uncomfortable and embrace the unexpected, and as a result, see the common grace at work in every person and in the world around us. Thank you.